Well, everyone, welcome aboard. I think most of our attendees are logged in right now. We're going to wait a couple minutes till the last few people figure out how to log in. I know it's sometimes a little clunky. This is our second Zoom webinar, I guess they're technically called, where we're going to be teaching something tonight. If you saw in the email and haven't yet done it, there are a few things, supplies that you might need tonight. The intent with tonight's class is a cook-along. If you're not prepared to do that, this video will be available after tonight's presentation, so you can learn everything, absorb it tonight, and then cook the meal later tonight or tomorrow even, whenever it's convenient to you. But if you are following along tonight, there are a couple things that we suggest having ready. You're going to need a pan to cook your Copa steaks in.
Which I think if you guys logged in early, there was an agenda slide up. We'll put that up again for you here shortly. It had a list of all the types of pans and other things you're going to need for the night. So it was at least a big enough saute pan to fit both pieces of your meat in. Tonight for the demo, we're just using one. We're only cooking one piece of meat, so this is plenty enough big for us. You need 2 small saute pans or 2 saucier pans to reheat your vegetable puree, your celery puree, and your beets and cabbage. All right, and then the only thing that you'll have to provide by yourself from your own home is going to be a little bit of butter and a squeeze of something acidic. It could be a couple drops of apple cider vinegar or even a lemon, which we're going to use tonight.
Yeah, so not a big material list. If you are going to be working alongside, please have those things ready. And also, plates, silverware, things like that, just the basics. But dinner, the intent is, it's about 6:30 right now. We're going to get into the heavy material here in a couple minutes. But we're trying to have our cooking part, the live part of the presentation around 7:10. So that gets you to eating sometime around 7:20, 7:25 for a nice dinner. So,
and then we will discuss this much later, but we do bring in farm-raised animals, so they vary in size and shapes. So we try to stay to exact ounces for you guys per cut. So some of you guys will have thicker cuts, thinner cuts of pork. For those with thicker cuts that are cooking along with us tonight, I recommend preheating your oven to 350 degrees because you will have to, after you sear your pork copa tonight, you'll have to put it in the oven just for a few minutes.
And by thicker, you'll see we've got a couple different of the cuts back here. This one's going to be on the thinner side, and here on the bottom,
big old boy.
This big guy's on the thicker side. This one would need to be dropped in the oven, whereas this thinner one we can finish in a pan as is.
Absolutely, right on stovetop.
So I think it looks like we've got everyone logged in. So we're going to get started out tonight. I guess for us, we've been talking about this class for years, and over the last, when did we do our first class with Fresh Fork before OCP even? Probably 2013?
It feels like 20 years ago now, but I think it was 2013 we started doing I think we developed our Butcher Series class.
Yeah.
Which has led to,
a lot of things.
Obviously, yeah.
But we've done a ton of classes in the past, and then obviously with the coronavirus, last year changed a lot. We went from, at our peak, probably 7 years ago, doing upwards of 40 events a year to doing 0 in 2020. So getting into 2021, we really wanted to try something different, and we piloted this Zoom program with our Thanksgiving beer dinner, which was its 11th, I think, this past fall that we did, and we did it virtual, and it was a great success. So we're excited about this winter to be able to try a couple different things and do some new classes, something out of the ordinary. And the one thing that we've learned, and we've been talking about for the last 4 years since we opened Ohio City Provisions, is that for Christmas, everybody, it seems, to get a sous vide machine, a circulator for Christmas.
I think it was Christmas of 2016. All of Cleveland got a Nova or a small circulator, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and they come in on, we're closed on December 25th and 26th, and on December 27th, they walk in the shop thinking about this circulator they have, and they come to us and say, I want the most expensive cut of meat you have.
Yeah, it was ribeyes. I'll take that whole tenderloin. Can you vacuum seal it for me? I want to sous vide it. I'm like, if that's what you want, sure, we got it for you. Absolutely.
And it's something that at the butcher shop, those are obviously cuts we try to always have, but is it a cut that's perfectly matched to the sous vide technique? And this is something that Adam and I have talked a lot about. At Ohio City Provisions, we use the sous vide machine all the time for consistent production of a lot of our lunch meats. So our roast beef, for example, it's a cut that's a challenge to cook the same every time in the oven. With the sous vide technique, we can cook it the same every single time and get that same product.
Correct.
Some things that are going to take forever to cook, like our porchetta di testa, which is a deboned pig's head that's been cured and seasoned.
Right.
If you tried cooking that in your home oven, well, you're going to make a colossal mess, and you might as well just throw your oven away.
Yeah, go buy a new oven. Absolutely.
So the sous vide has applications that are perfect for us. And with our customers coming in asking these questions, we figured we might as well put a class together that focuses on how to use it in the home and how to translate a recipe or perhaps even a butchery technique into something that's applicable for the sous vide.
Correct. Yeah, and even when we'll go through a couple different cuts today. Obviously, we're going to focus on the copa, which is what we have. But going back to the tenderloin, there are some novice cooks at home that aren't really comfortable even roasting a whole tenderloin. So understandably, the sous vide is an excellent step that you can take to ensure that you can pull off a perfectly medium rare tenderloin. So
yeah, I always explain to a lot of our customers, and Adam, you can probably talk better to this than I can, but in the restaurant world, let's say you're serving dinner and you get your dinner rush at 7:30, or better yet, you have a banquet, you're serving a wedding, and you've got filet mignon on the menu, and you have 100 of them that you have to cook, and you have a very short period to finish them off, and you need 30 of them that are rare and 40 of them that are medium and another 30 that are well done. How on earth can one line cook do that? And Adam, in a restaurant world, this is probably a dream come true, isn't it?
It really is. So there's a couple different ways you can use sous vide. We like to say in the restaurant world, we don't want to use it as a crutch. We don't want to have to rely on it, but it does have its benefits, and they really are fantastic. So a lot of times when I was in restaurants, what we would do is we would take, if we had what we call a big boy steak, a giant, 16 to 20 ounce ribeye, we would vacuum seal that. We would sous vide it to 130 degrees, so to speak. So all the line cook would have to do is pick it up, take it out of the bag, dry it off, give it a nice hard sear and a butter based, let it rest and serve it. That way we could take a steak that would normally take 30 to 45 minutes to cook, and we can get it out to you in a desirable, what we call pickup time. So, I mean, no one wants to order a steak and wait an hour and a half for their meal to get to the table. The biggest benefit I've ever seen in restaurants is just being able to replicate results. And this is where sous vide is really amazing. So let's just take like a pork tenderloin or a steak, so to speak. We would take pork tenderloins, season them up, vacuum seal them, cook them a la sous vide, and then cool them back down. And then all the line cooks would have to do is pick them up, sear them quickly on all sides, baste them, and then you had a perfectly cooked pork tenderloin every single time. So it's a big benefit for restaurants. It's not a replacement for proper braises, in my opinion. I still don't think you get a sous vide short rib. In my opinion, it's not going to be the same as a properly braised oven short rib. But to each their own on that.
Yeah.
But,
well, and I guess we got a question from the audience. So we always forget the basics when we do these.
yeah.
I'm Trevor.
I'm Adam.
And we're from Ohio City Provisions, Fresh Fork Market, Wholesome Valley Farm, the Cleveland Farm Team, as we like to call it. And we're here to teach you a little bit tonight about these techniques.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but as you see, we've got this sous vide technique. It's got its applications in the restaurant and also at home. And for us, what we want to kind of dive into today is a little bit about the farming and the butchery side of it as well. So one of the things that's important to us at Ohio City Provisions is the type of animals we have. And we focus a lot on heritage breeds and definitely pasture raised. Yep. And so without going too much into this, because this isn't really a farming class tonight, but I raise most of the hogs at my farm, Wholesome Valley Farm in Holmes County. And we raise them outside on pasture or finish them in the woods. And they get to forage for hickory nuts and acorns and honestly dirt. Like they're looking for minerals in the soil that help balance their diet. So it's interesting to think about pork almost as if you would think about wine, that there's a terroir to pork in the sense that
100%.
That there's minerals that you can't replicate in a barn that they're finding in the woods. And it's the microbial activity in the soil, everything from that. It's amazing that Mother Nature has figured it out. So we start with hogs that are raised on pasture, but then we also take a step that we've learned as butchers that we really appreciate. And we take our hogs to a bigger size. And what's important to understand is from a farming point of view, an animal has a certain growth period. Early on, it takes a lot of protein to help develop its organs and its its
Bone
trajectory
structure.
and bone structure.
Yep.
And then the bones finish growing out, and you put the lean meat on the bones. And then the last thing that's added in is the fat, both intramuscularly and the meat itself, and then the surface fat on the exterior. And what the commodity hog industry has figured out is they've got it down to a science where it's you farrow in one barn, you put them in a nursery, which is just a warm facility for the baby pigs, and then you move them to a third barn, and these are usually on 3 different properties. And in that third barn, it's the finishing barn, and they've got it where you've got the daylight controlled by a timer, you've got the feed controlled, the water intake controlled, and they can grow hogs out in a specific number of days.
Yeah.
I have nowhere near that type of control. It's quite primitive, in fact. But what happens in that scenario is they're harvesting hogs usually at 230 to 260 pounds is the target weight. And what they figured out there is that's the weight that has the maximum, the animal peaks essentially. Like it's hit its most efficient growth period. And by that, I mean, anything over that, it takes more feed to add a pound of lean meat. And the exchange there is that you're adding additional fat. And fat for most marketers is not worth anything.
Nope.
At Ohio City Provisions, though, what we found is that we want our hogs to be harvested instead of 260 pounds, somewhere in that 360 to even 400 pounds.
Correct.
And it's something that I have to kind of judge every Monday when we're loading hogs to look at the structure of that animal. And I can tell you if that one's going to dress out good, if that one's not, and they're not all uniform. And so certain breeds dress out better at a bigger size than others. But what we get is an excess amount of surface fat in exchange for putting fat in the muscle itself. And the fortunate thing in our model, because we're doing whole animal butchery, is that somebody like Adam, who's a talented chef and a butcher, is able to take that extra fat and rework it in the sense that we're able to incorporate it into sausage recipes incorporating beef.
Yep.
Able to render it to use for everything from whipped
frying lard. Yep.
Actually, this week he rendered a couple 100 pounds to send down to the farm that we're using in pie crust for an upcoming product that we have coming in about a month from now. So those are different things that we use from the whole animal perspective to utilize all that. And I think it's something you'll see in this next video.
Yeah. And even speaking of intramuscular fat, one of my favorite cuts of meat is the copa. And it really shows. You see the actual line in between the muscles and the marbling of the fat. And a lot of that, what that's from, is Trevor being able to take his hogs out on pasture. He's got about, what do you got? 40 to 60 acres, something like that
Well, they move around the farm. So
okay,
yes.
yeah. But he's able to get them in the woods where they have, he said before, the minerals, all the hard nuts from the trees, the hickory, the oaks, the maples, everything like that. And then they have plenty of room to roam. And that's the most important element, I think, for hogs is they're able to take that fat and process that exterior fat through their body. And that's where you help get some of that extra marbling. It's really important. So there's a lot of hog talk, and we can go on and on for hours and hours about hogs. But today, the cut, obviously, we're going to do is the copa. The copa is a muscle that comes from, starts at the neck, ends at the loin. It's not a very hard muscle to extract, but nonetheless, we're going to show you this video here about butchery, and we'll kind of run through at least a half a side of a hog. And kind of a day in the life of what we do at Ohio City Provisions.
And after this video, we'll take some questions. So if when you're watching this, you think of, hey, I'm always curious about where the secreto steak comes from or something like that, or have questions about anything on the butcher side, that just think about them, jot them down, and in about 10 minutes, we'll be back to answer those questions.
Cheers, guys. Ready? Let's go.
Here at Ohio City Provisions, we work with whole animal butchery. And you'll see today when we break this animal down, there's different applications for each part of it. On a hog, a lot of these pieces are going to be similar to the anatomy of a beef or a lamb. They just got different names. And we're going to explain where everything comes from so you can see a little bit about why we're suggesting sous vide for the copa steak. On the hog, you've got your front shoulder, which is going to be broken into the jowl, the arm, or also called the picnic roast, and the butt. We're going to have our center section, which includes our loin, which is where your pork chops come from, your baby back ribs, spare ribs, and your bacon underneath all that. You've got your short loin, or also your boneless loin roast and sirloin here on the end, and then your fresh ham. And as a whole animal butcher shop, we have to work with the animal to make decisions each week. And one of the things that we want to point out today is that when we're cutting the Copa roast, we might not be able to get other cuts out of the animal because of that. So Adam, can you give us a quick demonstration on where we're going to break this animal to extract the Copa roast?
Absolutely. So as Trevor said, at Ohio City Provisions, we break down whole animals. Now this might look a little intimidating and unfamiliar to everyone at home, but as Trevor just went through, once we break this down in the primals, things will start looking more familiar. Now for the Copa, we're going to pull that muscle from right off the top of the Boston butt. Now what this is, it's the end of the neck muscle that runs all the way through the top of the Boston butt into the start of the loin. Now for us to separate this off the main carcass, we traditionally split between the 4th and 5th rib. Today, because we want a little extra of our Copa muscle, we're going to split between the 5th and the 6th rib, okay?
And now that we've broken the animal into primals and then further subprimals, as they're called, we now get to make a decision based on not only what we cut, but what the customer wants and sometimes what the seasons are dictating. So Adam, maybe let's start at the back of the hog. I think that's probably the most straightforward. And we've talked about the different options for the fresh ham.
Absolutely. So the fresh ham here, we still have what's called the H-bone and the sirloin connected to it. What we'll do, one of the options is we'll remove the sirloin, cut that into about 1-inch beautiful sirloin chops. Otherwise, we can take it and put it as a roast. For the ham, for us, we can pull off the back shank. We can do different stews and braises in the wintertime. The fresh ham meat itself, we can pull a couple different types of fresh roast out of it. Eye of rounds, bottom rounds, much like you would see in beef. However, we just replicate that in a pork leg. What makes most sense for us here at the shop is we'll bone this out and we'll do boneless ham for deli meat. Works really well.
Now that we've talked a little bit about the ham, though, we get to the more valuable and desirable cuts of the hog.
Yeah.
Right? So what do we have here, Adam?
So right here we have what we call, and I guess in beef would be a short loin, right? We left the tenderloin on this, right? You see the eye here. Normally we'd pull the tenderloin off, bone this out, and this would become either a boneless pork roast or boneless pork chops. Today, because we like to be have a little fun at Ohio City Provisions, again, we left the tenderloin on. So what we're going to do is cross-cut these at about 1.5 inches thick. And we're going to have pork T-bones. Starting up front for your T-bones, by the time we get back towards the sirloin end, we'll have a couple nice, beautiful, thick pork porterhouses. Here at Ohio City Provisions, there's one thing you'll definitely see all the time, and that's bone-in pork chops. One thing you won't see are baby back ribs, because this is where Trevor spoke before, we have to start making decisions. We can pull all these bones off with a little bit of loin attached, and that would be our back ribs or baby back ribs. Here, what our customers seem to have demanded since we've opened are bone-in pork chops. So what we'll do is simply remove this chine bone, cut them individually between the rib, which puts them about 1 inch thick, and we kind of splice them up a little bit and French the top of the bone.
So what we've had to do is think of different ways to market other parts of the animal. So the Copa roast, for example, is a way to help us balance the demand. So the Boston butt, the shoulder roast here, we don't get a lot of demand for people coming in to do a long, slow braise. They want quick satisfaction, like a pork chop. Well, when we pull this Copa steak out of here, you're going to notice that the Copa is going to look suspiciously just like this. These are the same 4 muscles that come into the pork loin that run through the Copa and into the neck. Here we have the pork shoulder. Some of the cuts that come off of this and the things that we cook in the kitchen are very familiar to us. The Boston butt, oftentimes cut into thick steaks, 2.5, 3 inches thick as a roast, or served whole is excellent for braising. Think like, pork carnitas, put in the smoker in the summertime for smoked pork shoulder. So these are cuts that generally take a longer time to cook. So when we extract that Copa roast, which as we mentioned is the same 4 muscles that go from the neck through the shoulder and into the pork chops, they're going to have a different structure to them. They're going to have a different mouthfeel unless we cook them properly.
Correct.
So that's why today when we're talking about sous vide, we're going to pull this Copa roast out, tie and cut it into Copa steaks, and we're going to need to cook them a little bit different than the pork chop. So Adam, what are we going to do here to get to the Copa steak?
All right, so first we're going to remove the rest of the spinal column, all right? We're going to start with the beginning of this rib cage, follow that up to the spine, and then peel off these feather bones up top here. Well, we have many different types of butchery knives that we use throughout the whole carcass. Today, when we start using this
cutting into the subprimals, we're going to want to use just a standard boning knife. Now this is by a company named Forstner, very, very sharp. What we want is a semi-flex or semi-stiff, if you will, just a little bit of give on it. What that gives is going to allow you is as you're cutting around the bone, it'll bend, but still stiff enough to cut through the cartilage, right? This one right here, they make all different shapes and sizes, but this is 6 inches, plenty enough to get the job done.
And as you can see, Adam's taking his boning knife and he's tracing along and up along the bone. So the goal with the boning knife is not to cut into the flesh, but actually to ride right along the edge of that bone and get it in every little crevice so that later we can clean up that cut, clean up that markable cut the way we want.
Correct.
So you see he's holding it what's called pistol grip right now and just trying to get the tip of that knife. He's cutting with the last ½ an inch or so and just kind of pulling it right along the neck there.
Now that we removed what we call the neck bones, you want to save these. These are perfect for your Sunday sauce or throw out to the dog.
So as you can see now, Adam has exposed that copa muscle here, but it's still kind of buried on top of the shoulder blade here. So in the Boston butt roast, that's what we have prepared now. We would clean up a little bit of the excess fat off the outside. If you want the whole thing, there you go. Most of our customers want an individual roast, so we usually cut it about 2.5 or 3 inches and
Correct.
get about 5 or 6 roasts out of this individual
Correct.
muscle.
All right, now that we removed the neck bones off of our Boston butt, we're going to try to separate the copa from the rest of the shoulder. Now if you look, you can start to see the eye, all right? We're going to follow that back and you can kind of see a natural seam develop, right? What we're going to do is cut almost a straight cut down until we hit the back of the scapula or the shoulder bone. Here we go. All right, now to clean up this copa, what we're going to do is take off this fat cap. Pretty easy. You can come to either side and just ride along this natural seam that's going to ride right underneath the back fat and the top of the shoulder muscle. All right, this looks pretty good to me. You have your eye, which went into the loin, right? And then back towards the neck, you have what we call, a lot of your smokers, anyone who does a lot of barbecue will call your money muscle, this beautiful, nice chunk of neck muscle right here, okay? At this point, we're going to tie it up and cut it in steaks. We're gonna tie this up with some butcher's twine here at Ohio City Provisions. We like to sport this red, white, and blue. You know, it's patriotic pork, so you might as well dress it up accordingly. So to truss, what we're gonna do is start off coming in just about an inch and then tying what we call a square knot. Pretend you're starting to tie your shoes, right? 1 cinch knot, and then add one more on top of it, okay? At this point, you can cut that string. All right, so we got our cinch knot. Now we're gonna do our loop. And it's very important here that when we do our, make our first loop, we wanna twist it twice. What that's gonna do is cinch the knot shut very, very tightly. And as we cut our steaks, hence cutting through our twine, those knots are gonna hold. If you just do one twist, your whole truss will fall apart. All right, so here we go. I'll try to do it slow for you guys. 1, 2, and then you're going to go just about an inch, inch and a half, pull up, and cinch down. You don't have to pull too tight, just get it pretty uniform, all right? If you pull too tight sometimes, your string will cut into the meat. So here we go again, 1, 2, again, about 1 inch apart. Go forward. Now as we get to the end, you're gonna start to come to a point right here. You might not be able to get a cinch knot on here, okay? So we're just gonna do something called facing and square this off. But at that point, you have yourself a nice truss roast. All right, now that we have our copa roast, nice bound and tied, we're gonna slice it. Before you cut, flip the roast over and just make sure that your strings are straight. As you slice through the roast, in between the strings in the bottom half, you don't want to cut your strings on the top of the roast, okay?
So as you can see, the muscles change a little bit from the pork chop. As we get closer to the shoulders here, and we get all the way up here into the neck, we get this intramuscular fat, and with the intramuscular fat comes connective tissue, which is a little tougher to cook. So with using the sous vide technique, we can get comparable results in the toughest muscle and the most tender muscle all at the same time. All right, well, I hope everyone enjoyed that video. We had a lot of fun making that. That's the best part, I think, about this new format is that everyone literally has a front row seat and sometimes an overhead seat, which I think has really helped in explaining all this. But does anyone have any questions about the butchery or why we chose the Copa roast? Anybody there?
Any other questions on general sous vide cooking or butchery?
Oh, it looks like we have one coming in here. Why do we tie it? So the question is, why do we tie the steaks?
So when you have a muscle, so the question, obviously, why do we truss or tie steaks? So when we have a muscle, there's all different parts and pieces, and the intermuscular fat is different from one end to the other. As we tie it tightly and uniformly, it's going to cook that exact same way. It's going to cook more uniformly, and the biggest thing is going to cook more evenly throughout.
And it's just going to hold it together also. I think
it also looks nice.
Looks nice. It's presentation part of it as well.
At the butcher shop, we always jab each other when like everyone's trussing. We make sure our lines are perfectly straight, and so if Trevor ties something, it's off a little bit. We go, oh, buddy, what's that?
Yeah.
And occasionally, when I mess one up, he'll throw it at me. That's pretty awesome.
So we have some more questions coming in quickly here. Is that hog the one we're eating tonight? It's one of many that you're eating tonight. There are, so this is something interesting that we touched on a little bit in the video, that each hog, it doesn't yield a whole bunch. So our number one selling cut is a pork chop. We get about 10 cuts per side. So what you saw was the side of pork there. And that's why we try to find different ways to market things like this Copa steak. You saw there in that video, I think we got 8 Copa steaks out of this hog. Well, there's, I think, 84 people on tonight's video tonight. So we had to cut 10 sides of pork to get that. And not every side cuts is the same size and the same weight. So you don't get the same number of cuts out of it in that sense. So some of you are eating that hog tonight. Some of you are eating its brother or its sister. And some of you are eating somebody unrelated.
That's a very good way to put it. Yes. What's the next question we have?
Where does the Copa come from?
All right. So the Copa, if you missed it in the video, so the Copa comes from, Trevor, the shoulder. So as we break down the spine, this hardy farming spine we have here, we'll cut it right off the back of the spinal column. So it literally is the muscle that starts at the top of the neck and works its way back to the loin. So it's the connective top to on the Boston butt. It's a connective muscle from the neck to the loin.
So it's interesting. Anyone that deer hunts, they always say like the back straps, that's the loin in a deer. Hogs, humans, deer aren't all that different. You've got the.
Hold on, I got a sharp knife. Don't move.
Yeah, the loin runs right along the vertebrae there, all the way up through the shoulder and into the neck.
Yeah.
Oh wow, a whole bunch of questions. How many inches thick is the largest Copa that needs the oven, and how thick is the smaller version? Good question. So the smaller versions are going to be something that's about 1 inch thick. So this is approximately 1 inch. Most of you are going to have a steak like this. Yeah. If you have one off of a very generous hog and somebody wasn't portion controlling, you're going to have something like this that's twice as thick. Yeah. I'd say 90% of people have the first version that's going to cook very easily on the stovetop.
Yeah, and that first version, the thinner version, again, you can cook all the way on the stovetop. The thicker version, you'll just have to pop in your oven just for a few minutes.
Yeah, right. And we'll cover that here in a couple of minutes. Getting that ready. Oh, what are the selected seasonings? I think we'll talk a little bit more about seasoning when we get to actually reheating the meal tonight and what we sous vide everything with. So one of the videos coming up shortly is how to set up your sous vide machine and how we set up the Copa roast tonight. So we'll talk some about the seasoning on that then.
Absolutely. A couple more coming in here.
Copa, where does the name come from?
No clue. Not gonna lie to you.
Yeah. We don't have time to Google it right now.
So the Copa, I believe it's my experience with it is from Italian style cooking. A lot of it's to do with charcuterie. So I know in Italy they have coppa one or two ways. It's called coppa crudo, which is the raw coppa, or coppa cotto, which is a cooked coppa, which we have tonight. Also, you'll see a coppa in many different forms. If you guys are very familiar with something called capicola, or as everyone that comes in, hey, you got any gabagool? Hey, it's all from a coppa. It's all from the same mussel. So this is actually something we cure a lot with charcuterie. This mussel is highly prized for its intermuscular fat, inter and intramuscular fat content, and as Trevor said before, that surface fat. As you saw in the butchering video, we cut that big fat cap off so that we have a nice, more lean shoulder steak for us to grill. When we're curing it, we'll actually leave that fat cap on because you're going to slice it paper thin after it's done curing. You want that fat just to melt in your mouth. So as far as origins of coppa, I'm sorry, I wish I could delve a little deeper into it. I only know the Italian definition of it. So,
well, the questions are really pouring in now. Can you sous vide the entire butt
for
pernil? Okay.
No, I haven't never done a sous vide pernil, which is usually a different cut. So pernil, or the which is a Puerto Rican roast, comes from what's called the picnic ham. So you have your whole pork shoulder, as we showed in the video. The top half is going to be the Boston butt. The bottom half is going to be what we call the picnic ham. So once you remove the shank off the picnic ham with the rind on, the pernil is usually rubbed, marinated, seasoned, and then slow roasted in the oven. At this point, you kind of cook and tenderize all the meat. At the very end, you turn your oven way high and crisp up the skin or the chicharrones, and that's pernil. I haven't seen it sous vide. I'm sure there's recipes online you could follow for just a rind on sous vide pork butt. The biggest thing with anything with skin on it, any kind of roast, you really want to render that gelatin out of the skin so that when you hit it with hot heat, it will balloon and puff up and be really crispy and crunchy for you.
There's a whole bunch more questions. One of them I'm going to table towards the end. Are all the vacuum sealed meats sous vide safe? From OCP, yes. Once they're vacuum sealed, you can cook them that way. They're not going to be seasoned though. So one of the things we'll talk about in setting up your vacuum pouch for the sous vide technique is to season your meat first. So if you want to put it in our vacuum bags, yes, they're safe enough to use. And yes, the sausage patties as well. You could cook the sausage patties in sous vide. In fact, we're doing that this week. We have, I kind of alluded to the lard that we rendered that we're going to use now at the farm. We're making quiches for one of the fresh fork bags about a month out. And so we need to have, the lard for the crust. We need to have sausage for the filling. And so instead of cooking 100 pounds of sausage in a skillet, we're cooking it in sous vide and crumbling it first, and we'll have a better yield and more consistent results with a lot less mess. So yeah, you can cook any sausage in the sous vide bag.
Next question is, do you usually carry the coppa or is it special order? Besides this week, we usually always have the coppa in. We usually get 8 to 10 sides of pork in a week. We usually do about half to 3/4 is coppa, and the rest we'll leave as whole pork shoulders to do roast. But we always have coppas. If you are interested in getting a coppa, we've been fortunately very busy the start of this year as well. So just give us a call at the beginning of the week and let us know you want some coppas. Our animals come in Monday from the farm. We start cutting Tuesday and Wednesday. So if you could have any kind of special order in by Monday, we'll be able to take care of you.
There's a question that asks, how do you know when a cut is good for sous vide? This is something that if you shop at Ohio State Provisions, you can ask our deli staff. Anyone working behind the counter has culinary training, and they're generally pretty well versed in these techniques. In general, any cut can be cooked sous vide. What we're saying tonight is that there's some of them that it's not 100% necessary. So the filet mignon, for example, is very tender as it is. You can get the same results in a lot less time cooking them in a cast iron skillet. But something like the coppa roast, or if you want to do a chuck eye steak out of a beef, which is the same cut, just beef instead of pork, or if you want to do a cut out of the round that perhaps is leaner and less forgiving, the sous vide is going to be a very good technique for those type of cuts.
Yep. What do we got here? Most recipes use sear at the end. Is that true to caramelize the fats, sugars? Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've had many sous vide recipes and different techniques along the way where we've seared them first to kind of lock in that seared roasted flavor as they're cooking to add more, like think of short ribs and things like that. Tonight we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to sear at the end. End of the day, it's all your preference and kind of what your recipe calls for. And the best thing about sous vide cooking is experiment. You know, one of my our host tonight, Mr. Bob Campbell, who will join us later on, one of the things I've told him is like, for Christmas, we bought him a notebook. And the whole thing is like everything you cook, just write notes down, just be able to replicate it. So it's a very good idea for sous vide cooking, especially, is to write down times, temperatures, how long they cook for. We always plan to cook them for 4 hours, but sometimes life comes up and next thing you know, you're 6 hours into your cook. So just kind of write down results and go from there. Maybe you'll find that searing before sous vide, vacuum sealing it and cooking it is better. Maybe you'll find that cooking it first sous vide and searing after works better for your application. But it's really going to depend on the cut, the type of protein, and the duration of cook. That's really going to dictate what that is.
There's a couple more questions coming in. One is, under what name would we know the money neck cut that was part of the Copa? I think what we're talking about there is in the competition barbecue world where you're smoking for competition. You know, when they're going to serve the judge, they're not picking just any part of that pork shoulder or the Boston butt apart. They're picking the muscles that's the most tender. And you know, for us, I don't know the technical name in terms of the anatomy of the hog of that specific muscle, but we can pick it out when we're cooking.
Yeah, so it's going to be the very prominent muscle on the very top of the shoulder of a pork shoulder. What a lot of guys do call it the money muscle, because the joke is like if that muscle is perfectly cooked, you'll get the money in a barbecue competition. What they'll actually do, a lot of them will steam that muscle back so that can develop a better smoke ring, a more circular smoke ring all around that muscle. They'll still cook the whole pork butt with the muscle attached, but they'll extract that muscle 3/4 of the way through cooking and finish it a little differently. So yeah.
Another question about using reusable sous vide bags. This is something that's new to us. I know at Ohio State Provisions, we go through a lot of vacuum bags. I guess my opinion is, one, and I've not used these bags yet, but are you going to get a good seal every time? And two, how much of a pain in the butt is it to wash that bag when you're done?
Yeah.
You know, we're cooking, and this is something we'll touch on a little bit later during our safety portion, but we're cooking in a environment with no oxygen, anaerobic environment. And there's a lot of very deadly bacteria that can grow in that environment. And if you don't start with a sterile product first, so imagine you go to the doctor and he uses reusable gloves. How much do you trust that he can wash those adequately and make them sterile?
That's a good point.
You know, I'm not sure that I would trust a reusable, sous vide bag for that purpose. I mean, you've got to be very, very careful that there's no bacteria in that bag that can grow in that environment.
Yep. Any more questions?
Last question, bone-in sous vide. Do you recommend bone-in sous vide?
Last question is bone-in sous vide. Absolutely, you can do a sous vide with bone-in and any type of meat. I've done it with short ribs. I've done it with ribeye steaks. The biggest thing is to make sure you wrap the bone so it doesn't pierce the bag. As you vacuum seal the bag's going to become tight around the bone. A lot of saw cut ends, think of the end of a rib bone on a ribeye, is going to be very sharp. So what you can do, you can buy bone paper. A simple at-home hack is just to wrap it in a bunch of plastic wrap so it won't penetrate the bag. The last thing you want is a hole to get punched through the bag from bone, and then your sous vide bag, after you've cooked it for 24 hours, fill up with water and you've lost all that flavor. So if you're cooking bone in, just make sure that it's not going to pierce the bag. Cool.
Well, I think that's it for questions on this segment.
So now let's go into the whole reason we're here. Why do we sous vide?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as we talked and we've touched on in a lot of these questions, I've tabled a couple of them to talk about later when we get to the cooking portion of the night. But, again, we're cooking for sous vide for consistent results is the number one reason, I think.
Yeah.
We're also cooking to lock in flavor in that bag. Nutrients, moisture, even fat, these are all components that we need in our culinary techniques to actually have a good meal. I think there's also an easy perspective to it as well.
There's the old, like, think of the old, remember the old, I don't know if you get sued on Zoom, but remember the old, like, Ronco, like, set it and forget it infomercials? This is like the ultimate set it and forget it. You know, you don't have some rotisserie chicken roaster going in the corner of your kitchen that might catch on fire or flame up. I mean, this is a controlled water bath. And so, I mean, the worst thing you could do is just let your meat get a little more tender, I guess.
Yeah.
A couple hours later. But like Trevor said, the main reasons why for cooking sous vide is exact temperature cooking, being able to cook evenly with exact doneness. And the most important thing, even at home and in restaurants, is highly repeatable results. And I mean, that's what I love about it. And also for us, especially tonight, using the Copa steak, we could take a cut of meat, in this case pork, that has a lot of intramuscular fat and connective tissue, and render it almost like butter through proper cooking. So.
Yeah, I think that is a good point to make, that we can take something that's difficult to do and make it much more simple.
Yeah.
But go ahead. I say, with that being said, we should probably kind of get our sous vide set up. So I think we have a slide next, unless there's any questions first. Looks like we might. Can you cook too long in sous vide? That one's going to be, we'll talk about that when we're cooking a little bit longer. What are some cuts that would be? Other cuts that wouldn't be tender that could turn out well in the sous vide. So we talked about on beef, there's the chuck eye steak, which is going to be very similar to the Copa steak. You can even do, as Adam mentioned, you can do short ribs or beef shanks, things that take a long time to do. Perhaps, let's say, you know, you're going to work, you can put it in the morning. It's going to be mostly done when you get home without running your oven all day.
You know, different proteins. You could do chicken thighs that you cut through with a fork. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to it.
And for us, I think we mentioned earlier at Ohio State Provisions, we make our own lunch meats. For roast beef, and this is something you can have on the dinner table. Is a whole roast, or you can slice it for a lunch meat. Roast beef with the eye around and bottom around, they're two of the cheapest cuts in our case. Yep. And they are absolutely delicious when cooked in the sous vide. So there's a lot of different cuts that'll be applicable for this.
So that's a good thing you said, cook in the sous vide. So what sous vide actually translates to is under vacuum. So cooking sous vide, cooking a la sous vide is what we call it. So cooking sous vide is literally the action of taking meat, putting it into a vacuum pouch, and withdrawing all the air out of it. Okay. You can use your food saver, a vacuum like chamber machine, but at the end of the day, the term sous vide is just the action of sealing meat into a bag. And what that does is that bag creates a very, very tight seal around the meat, allowing for even thermal transfer. Think of it. If you see it, you've seen the vacuum pouches we sent you today. That meat is really tight in there. So it allows the water bath to hit all different sides of it and cook evenly. So, but to do that, you have to learn how to set up your sous vide properly. And I think we have a slide for that, maybe somewhere.
We'll transition to that slide right now.
All right, so to set up your sous vide equipment, here's the equipment you're going to need. First off, you're going to need an immersion circulator. So that is actually the physical heating and pump component that's going to heat and circulate your water bath. You're going to need a proper vessel to cook in. That's going to be one that's not leak. You don't want hot water dripping all over your countertop. So a solid hopefully something that's, you can use a pot and pan, a bucket. We have these little plastic Cambros that we'll show you later that are great for carrying cooking sous vide in. The biggest thing, plastic bag or vacuum pouch. So just make sure whatever you're sealing it in, if you have a vacuum saver or food saver, make sure that pouch is BPA free. Most of your professional sous vide equipment, sous vide bags are going to have an inner layer. It's called polyethylene coating, which is food safe. And but if you don't have a food saver or a vacuum pack machine or a chamber vacuum machine, I remember seeing this hack in a David Chang cookbook years ago, which was a Ziploc bag, which is BPA free as well. But they take your meat in, seal all the way up to the corner and stick a straw, and they actually suck the rest of the oxygen out. If you're not going to do that, you can simply seal it up to a corner and put a little bit of water on top of it, and that water will help push the air out of the bag. So that gets to our last piece of equipment is a vacuum machine. Some of you at home will have a food saver. At Ohio City Provisions, we're very fortunate enough to have what we call a chamber vacuum machine, which gets a 100% vacuum on your meat. I know we alluded to it before. For free of charge at OCP, we will vacuum seal. I will even throw salt and pepper on your steak, whatever you need us to. Let us know. We'll be glad to vacuum seal your meat if you're going to sous vide at home.
Yeah, so that's an important point to make, that if you're showing up at Ohio State Provisions and you're intending to sous vide something, come to us with your recipe or your ideas of how you want everything seasoned, and we can get it set up for you so you don't have to open it back up and do it again. There's no reason to have that waste.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So is there any question? Oh, wow, it looks like there's a lot of questions actually. We'll take these questions and we're going to go to a short video to talk about setting up the sous vide machine and some of the steps before we start cooking dinner. What is the difference in cooking a copa versus a non-fatty piece of meat?
So the copa obviously has more fat to it. So you're going to need the extended period of cooking time to render those fats edible or without tooth, right? So they're nice and smooth. The leaner meats are going to have a much shorter cook time. There's less fat. So, if you're going to, let's put it this way. If we're going to do these copa steaks, we did them at 140 degrees for 24 hours overnight. If you're going to sous vide a tenderloin, you only need 2 hours, 3 hours. Just you want to get it to cooked evenly on a lean steak.
Yeah, and I guess think about what has more than one muscle to it. So something like a tenderloin that's one muscle has no connective tissue between it, no sinew, no fat, stuff like that. It's going to take a little bit less time to cook. But something like the copa, we've got 4 different muscles that run through there. Same with the chuck eye steak. Ribeye, same thing. Ribeye's got multiple muscles. They're going to take a little bit longer to cook than something like the filet mignon or the tenderloin.
So next question we have is some meats look like chicken, are to be cooked to 165 degrees and are safe, but understand you can sous vide them at a lower temperature. We'll touch on that towards the end. We're going to go through the USDA's beautiful chart of safety cooking, where we talk about different pasteurization temps within the bag and kind of what temperature you can hold meat for what amount of time, and how that essentially
kills pathogens
and prevents them from the spores from growing. So we will touch on that towards the end of the video.
There's also a question about recording. This is recorded tonight, so we will host it back on YouTube and be able to email that out. So if you don't feel like cooking your dinner live with us tonight, you can tune back in and get that. So with that being said, we're going to transition to the video about setting up your sous vide machine, and then we'll be back right after that. back. We hope everyone enjoyed that video. Now we're over here at the range and we're getting dinner heated up. So if anyone's cooking along.
Yep.
Um,
Now's the time to start heating up.
And we actually have a couple kind of, before you get started, step 0 steps. So we do have our copa cut here. Actually, Adam has this one mostly ready, but you have a little piece of string there. You're probably gonna want to cut that off now. You can cut it off on the plate later if you want, but it'd be easiest just kind of peel that off so that it's a little easier on the tooth. So now it's ready to cook. And I think step number 1 is really getting this pan good and hot, right?
Yeah. So we want to preheat this pan. So we want to put this over a nice medium-high flame and make sure it is nice and hot. A good little trick to know when you're hot enough, get a little water in your hand, and if you see those beads bounce around like that, you know you're hot, ready to go, okay? Sorry, I have my son crawling on the floor. You show him? There he goes. He's running. He's running. Chef Weston, everybody. So now that our pan's good and hot, what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of oil. Canola oil will work fine. Anything with a touch higher smoke point will be fine. We don't need much, just a little bit.
And why do you wait till the pan's hot to add the oil?
So if you add, when we go to launch this meat, and this pan's not hot, it's going to stick. 100%, it's going to stick every time. So we want this nice and hot, almost smoking. When we put it in, we're going to give it just a little press and make sure that it sears in all the corners. Let me get all this out of the way here. Nice and sears, just like that. And that's the sound you want to hear, right? Just push it down. All right, at this point, your pan is already smoking hot. We don't need to have the flame on high. So we're going to turn the flame down just a touch to a medium, okay? At that point, there's enough heat in the pan to carry cooking. So we just want to be able to sear without burning and be able to introduce enough heat to heat the core of this, all right, without charring the exterior of the pork shoulder.
Now, Adam, while that's cooking, I know we got a couple minutes here. We had a question during the Q&A about seasoning this cut and what's it been seasoned with.
Yeah.
And in the video, I know we kind of hinted to it that there's salt, pepper, there's a little bit of lemon zest in there, but I can see right here on the edge of the cut, we got a coriander seed.
Yeah, whole coriander. So what we did for these is I did a mix of a little bit of organic cane sugar, salt, pepper, and a little bit of garlic. And we made a rub, and we just seasoned them pretty liberally, actually, overnight. And then we put those in our vacuum seal bag, along with some whole coriander seed, some Guernsey butter, some fresh thyme, and then a couple peels of orange zest. A little bit of aromatics goes a long way within a sous vide bag. So, but they do add up at the end.
And I know while this is heating up too, we have a couple other things we wanted to kind of address here. There's other components that we're going to need tonight to finish this meal off. And I think anyone who's tuned in or joined us in the past for our live cooking demonstrations realizes that one of the things that we're most keen on is quality stock. And Adam, I think we have some here perhaps that's
so
pretty well gelled up. Huh?
Something you're not going to get from the from the aisle at your grocery store is properly reduced and gelatinous stock. As I think it was Beyonce said, I don't think you're ready for that jelly. There it is, right?
I can't tell you if you're right or wrong.
So the most important thing about this is as we add this to the pan, it's going to reduce down and thicken up to almost like a natural syrup or a glaze that's going to come our plate sauce, our finishing sauce.
And that's probably one thing that we reiterate on all these classes. And if you go to the Fresh Fork Market website and search rich stock or just stock, I know that there's a stock guide that Chef Parker Bosley put together probably 7 or 8 years ago.
Stock master himself.
Yeah, it's a PhD doctorate essentially on that.
I've been cooking for many years, and I've made thousands of gallons of stock, and somehow Parker just
he doesn't write every time.
Shows up and throws us out of the water.
And Adam, what were you stirring here? So we're talking about reheating the side dishes here.
Yep. So the accompaniments or the accoutrements of the evening with our pork shoulder are going to be a celeriac puree. So what we've done with this is celery root. We've peeled it, right? We've cut it into small little cubes. We then put it in a saucepan, covered it in just a touch of milk, just till it covers, and bring it to a low simmer a simmer over a low flame. If any of you guys have ever cooked cream or reduced milk or anything like that over a high flame, you know that it'll boil over very, very quickly. So what we want to do is just cover our celery root. You can put aromatics in there if you want. You can put an onion or a little bit of herbs or something like that. For this, all we did was just straight celery root and a little bit of whole Guernsey, grass-fed Guernsey milk. Once it's fork tender, we'll strain off the solids versus the liquid. We'll put it into our Vitamix or our blender. We'll start spinning it, add just a touch of the cooking liquid or the rendered milk till it starts to spin. And my way I like to make purees is the healthiest way of all. As soon as it starts to spin, you start to throw in lots of chunks of cold butter. Absolutely. The cold butter will break up in the blender and fully emulsify into your puree. Note on your purees tonight, don't heavily boil them. Don't bring them up to a simmer and have them popping all over. They will break on you. You will see them separate because we put a proper amount of butter into them.
And then Adam, this is almost done, so we got probably just a minute to talk a little bit about the cabbage. We got cabbage and beets here that I think start with a good technique that we talk a lot about called sweating, correct?
Yes. So we started with what we call julienne onions. So thinly sliced onions that we put in a pan and we just sweat with a little bit of oil. Now sweating is cooking, it's essentially cooking without color. So if you're going to sweat something, a beautiful way to start doing that is to add a little bit of salt. Not enough salt to season, but enough salt so that it actually starts to degorge the natural liquids that are in it, especially something like cabbage. So we'll sweat our onions, then we'll add our shredded cabbage to it. We'll salt it, and cabbage there's a ton of cooking liquid within cabbage, okay? So you won't need to add any extra stock right away. All that natural liquid will cook out. You want to almost cook that dry. In the meantime, we prepped the day before actually, is we roasted beets, or in restaurants we call them roasting beets, which is a kind of a, I don't want to curse, but a half-ass braised roast. We put beets in a pan, fill them up just a little bit with water, cover them with foil, and put them in about a 325-degree oven for about 2 hours or until they're tender. Hello, here I am. And then once that's done, we'll let them set just for 15 minutes. They're no longer piping hot. If you guys have latex gloves or some dish gloves, put them on. Grab yourself a towel you don't care about. And while the beets are hot, use a towel to rub away the skin. That way you're not sitting there peeling and wasting all the beets with a knife. When the beets are nice and hot and fully cooked, the skin just wipes right off, okay? We'll cool them down. We dice them nice and fine. When the cabbage is about halfway done cooking, we'll add the beets to it. We'll fold them in. You'll know when the liquid from the cabbage has evaporated because you'll start to see fond in the bottom of the pan, okay? Once you start seeing the fond, we'll add just a little bit of water, cook down until everything gets tender. Once it's tender, we'll simply season with a little bit of honey to sweeten it up, a little bit of red wine vinegar for the acid, and salt. Now we have cabbage and beets, everything earthy in that, right? So the vinegar helps to balance the earthiness. The sweet helps to bring out the natural sweetness that's in the beets. I know some people don't like beets. Listen, beets are sweet, okay?
And I think we're to the point now where we're kind of ready to conquer the last technique of the evening, which is we're going to glaze this steak.
Oh, she's pretty. Look at her.
So Adam has gone and seared both sides, and he's done it slow enough that it's heating all the way through the center. Again, if you have something much thicker than this, pop her in the oven for 5 or 10 minutes, and now continue to warm it through. But
also, disclaimer, I've been in restaurants for my whole life, pretty much. I don't have feeling in my fingers, so don't do this at home, okay?
And so the last step here is going to be to glaze it.
So we had a quick question. Our steak is looking done. How do we know when? Listen, it's thin. We're just trying to get it warm enough to slice. So this is the next step. So you have a proper sear on each side. We've been searing about 3 or 4 minutes each side. What I'm going to do now is I have a little bit of a pan here. I'm going to, if you guys can see this, drain the fat out. Any of the extra oil, any of the fat that is drained out of is rendered off our pork shoulder. We're going to take that away, and we're going to cook eggs with that tomorrow morning. All right. Everyone's at this step, I hope. If not, you can rewind us, I think. So at this point, we're going to add our stock. All right. Our oil's out. All right. We're going to add our our jelly. And again, we should be under a pretty low heat at this point.
And while that's reducing down some, we're going to try to field a couple questions here. There's some about food safety that we'll talk about in the future segment where we do have some charts for that. Is it important to leave extra room in the sous vide bag? No, you just, that extra room is wasted space. In our case, it's, you know, what size bags do we have on hand? So there was some extra room in the bags, and it's just a matter of size of what we have. How high is the flame to heat the copa? Every range is different. This is a giant variable. It's so difficult for us to give you exact recipes with time to get to a specific temperature. It's really kind of learning the technique and what you're looking for. So you want, as Adam showed, your pan to get hot where you throw water in it and it beads up almost instantly. That's an indication that it's hot enough, and from there go half of whatever it took to get there. Yeah. So that's kind of a good way to figure that out. And the last question right now is some people say that butter removes flavor from the meat and that raw garlic under 185 degrees is unsafe. What is our thought on that? Butter itself does have flavor and also lubrication, which is important.
Especially the butter that comes from these guys. It's insane.
Yeah, and so we disagree with the butter statement, but then in terms of the raw garlic, that's new knowledge to me. I know that we've had this discussion about raw garlic and charcuterie. And again, referring back to those FSIS tables that we'll talk about a little bit later, there's times at which something is cooked at a specific temperature that's going to reduce the pathogens.
But ultimately, the end all is the final preparation, which is the final preparation. And as you can see, we are way over 185 degrees on the surface temp of this meat. So at this point, we have our stock in. We have our flame I turned up to a boil, because all we're doing now is reducing the stock. So this is fortified stock, obviously from the shop. We did season this, okay? So please don't add any salt. All we're gonna add is a little bit of butter. Literally, we call it to pat it out. We're gonna add a pat of butter just to help emulsify the stock in. And then we're gonna add a little bit of acid. So as you can see here, as this reduces down, I'll push my copa up to one corner of the pan, tilt the pan back, and we can slowly start the baste. And as this reduces, this will take just a couple minutes, guys. As this reduces down, you'll see it start to almost turn into a glaze, okay?
And there's a couple other questions about temperature. There's a question about what temperature the steak be cooked to ensure they're ready. The steaks are fully cooked when they came. So in the sense, we're really just heating it up to finish it. Yeah. So you don't have to worry about you don't need to get out your thermometer and probe it.
Yeah. No, when we go to eat these steaks today, you'll probably, with the sear and everything else, we'll probably be getting up to about the 155 degree range. So. If we have any questions on puree, more questions on our beets and cabbage or searing? Oh yeah, she's getting there.
Right now, we're just trying to evaporate that stock a little bit more to reduce it down. So it's going to take just a minute. Hopefully, this gives you some time to finish your meal at home and kind of get it ready at the same time that we're doing this as well.
Absolutely. So if you have a preheated oven, this is a perfect time. If you're not, you can obviously stick your copa in your oven just for 5 extra minutes. But it's also time you can take your plates and preheat your plates. No one likes to plate a hot dinner on a cold plate. So kind of a chef tip there. If you guys are cooking and some point in the evening during this process, if you kind of over reduce your liquid and it gets really sticky, just add a little bit of water. If you reduce it all the way down, it's going to get salty on you. So please don't do that. We're cooking. More questions coming in.
Oh, there's a question about the stock that we provide. Yes, that's enough for both steaks. In this case, We only cooked one of them in here. If your pan was big enough, you could have put both in there, and yes, that's enough for both.
Just be aware that if your pan's, the wider your pan, the faster your liquid's going to evaporate. So if you need to add water to it, it's fine. You're just going to reconstitute the stock. It's not going to lose much flavor. Don't be afraid of adding just a little bit of water at a time. I mean, a spoonful at a time will be just fine. So we are almost there.
This last step goes very quick. So when you start to see it get thick like this, you want to be quick.
We're looking good. Again, there's quite a bit of butter in here, so just that's perfect temp. You just want it steaming, nice easy flame. I got this actually about half off the flame, just heating up. Yeah, as Trevor said, it's not quite like cooking sugar, but this final reduction is going to be pretty quick here.
There's a couple questions about wine pairing with this. We chose actually for tonight's dinner, we suggested a couple white wines actually, or I guess between white and red. It's a rosé. We have a sparkling rosé that's a brut rosé from M Cellars, and a dry rosé that's 0% residual sugars as well. With the vegetables, you could also do something like a Pinot Noir would be a good match for it as well.
All right, not to cut you off, but we are there. So as you can see, our stock, Tim, you want to come in for a close one, is almost getting that syrup-like consistency. So we're glazing, we're basting. As the stock on top of the meat cools, the next layer will solidify on top of it. Just think of it like you're almost shellacking this thing, right? At this point, we're going to add chunk of butter. Pull our beets off over here. Oh, I just made a mess. Don't worry, it's not our kitchen. Sorry, Bob. And so we asked you guys to have some kind of acid tonight. Some of it's vinegar, some of it's lemon. Here's a little quick trick for a small squeeze of lemon. You have a lemon, you got a knife. Don't cut the lemon in half. Just take just a quarter edge off. There's no seeds in it. Perfect amount of acid you need. Just a little quick shot. Cool. We are going to return this to the flame, melt in this butter. Again, at this point, taste your sauce. You're not going to need any extra salt. This is going to be, it should be, we tried to calculate this so it would cook up perfectly for you guys so you wouldn't have to reseason anything. So at this point, I'm going to call that done. I'm going to let this, we got, you know, for every 2 or 3 tablespoons of meat, or excuse me, of cooking liquid left. I'm going to just keep basting it as it cools. Let it sit. As it cools, we're just going to kind of glaze this out. Question. Resting time. For this cut, be a sous vide. There's not going to be much resting time on this one. If you want to rest it, you absolutely can. Give it 5 or 10 minutes. But I'm pretty confident on this one. You just kind of dish it up and go serve it.
And especially in this situation where we chilled it after cooking it, that we took it, cooked in the bag, put it in an ice bath, reduced the temperature down below 40, and those liquids reabsorb back into the meat, similar to when you'd be resting on a cutting board.
Right. So as you can see, look at this thing. It's starting to lacquer up. The sauce is starting to stick to the top of it. All right, we got enough sauce for extra plating. So now we're going to move over to the plating aspect of it. Just put it over there, yeah. One of these days, maybe we'll do a fancy class on, you know, sauce swoops and different types of plating. But for today, we're going to be very, very, very basic. Like that. Oh, it smells like Mother Earth. All right, and then we're going to simply plate our copa up like so. And here we go. We're going to glaze out. Bon appetito. I mean, very, very basic. We have just a puree of vegetables, a saute of some vegetables, and a super fatty pork shoulder. So what we're hoping for is the seasonings that we put on the pork shoulder is going to lighten up the fat content. We have kind of the, as we call it, the rug to tie the room together of the celery root puree, the nice vegetal aspect of that. And then the beets and the cabbage, we try to acidify to a point where it'll help balance everything out. And of course, if you're drinking a nice white wine, like Trevor suggested earlier, wine pairings go in a couple different ways, complementary and also we call it like cutting through. So I think a nice white wine for this would kind of cut through and balance the fat and earthiness of this dish. Lovely. Thank you, Sandra. You are the best. All right. It's beautiful. All right. So at this point in time, guys, dig into your dish. We're going to reset here, and I believe we have a master taster scheduled to be showing up here shortly.
We're back here with Bob Campbell, who's our lovely host tonight. Him and his wife Shelly are very good and able to host us here at their beautiful kitchen. So he gets to be our first taster, other than
completely unbiased, by the way.
Yeah, there's no pressure to say it's
Nope.
good when we're standing right here. Look how that just falls apart. You didn't have to cut too hard there, did you?
No, I have a sharp knife, and I really didn't need it. I
Yeah.
actually could have used a butter knife.
Yeah. Not too shabby, huh? And
Truly outstanding.
Awesome.
I'm going to tell you, I think I can cook, but I would add seasoning, but I wouldn't to this. It's truly, let it stand on its own. It's outstanding. Thanks, folks.
thank you, Bob.
Right.
And what do you're pairing tonight? A little bit of Chardonnay, keeping with the Ohio.
It's from the local Ohio wineries, which we try to support. And it's called a Debonnaire Chardonnay with little oaky, and it is outstanding. And I recommend it for you Ohioans.
Yeah, and we will in the coming weeks we'll start carrying this brand as well at Ohio City Provision. So
They're actually literally right across the street from our neighbors at, well, they're all on the same road at South River Vineyards and M. Cellars and Debonnaire. They're right out there in Madison, 40 minutes east of Cleveland.
how we do? All right.
You did great. Seriously, learned a lot
Awesome.
tonight. Appreciate the
Absolutely.
opportunity.
We're not just good looking, you know.
Well, no one said that.
I'll leave that one alone, but they know how to cook, and it was truly outstanding.
Awesome.
A technique that I've never used before, but absolutely through relatives, I've learned and going to give it a try. Truly an opportunity for us. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, Bob.
Take care.
Here, this is yours. You can take it with you. Don't forget your wine.
So I know we've had a lot of questions come in throughout the night about safety, and that's the last segment of our program tonight. So while you're sitting there enjoying your meal, we figure we can kind of talk about some of the more.
Ways, I don't know. While you're eating, why not talk about ways you could possibly get sick or die?
Yeah.
Sous vide. Why not?
Yeah.
Go right into it.
So one of the things that we do, we mentioned at Ohio State Provisions, we cook a lot in sous vide. We also cook in our smokehouse, which is a low temperature as well. And sometimes it's not the temperature you're cooking at, but how long it takes to chill it. So the government has put together some guidelines that are extremely helpful, and it's something that us as commercial producers, we actually have to follow. And if you just go to the internet and Google FSIS, which is food safety, FSIS, that's going to give you Appendix B is the standard that we live by. And that's going to be what's called the cook chill time. So somebody asked earlier about how long would you have to cook it, I think 145 degrees, something like that. Well, this chart gives you all kinds of time. So essentially it says that if you cook something to 145 degrees to sterilize it, you're going to have to hold it for X amount of time. And they have that for every temperature you can think of. And some of it is dictated by how much of a reduction you need. So we think of things in what's called log reduction.
Correct.
So it's something that's very difficult to understand unless you're a scientist. And essentially, a log is a 90% reduction in pathogens. And so, without getting too boring, if you had 1,000 pathogens and you reduced it by 1 log, you'd reduce it down to 100. 2 log would be to 10. 3 log would be to 1 remaining pathogen. It's not that you're killing all the pathogens, but you're reducing them.
And you're preventing them, you're holding them and preventing them from reproducing the spores to regenerate.
Yes. And so thinking about that, FSIS has done all the math and science for you, and they've tested it. So you can use Appendix B, which will be in the notes that we can email out after this, that shows cook times and hold times. So when we say hold times, it's not that we're cooking, the water doesn't come up to 140 degrees and we just drop the meat in and we start counting from there. It's when the internal temperature from coast to coast, from the outside to outside, is that temperature. Let's say 100.
More importantly, the center internal temperature.
Yeah, the center internal temperature from side to side is that final set point. That's when we hold it. So, for example, when we're cooking smoked Christmas hams, 145 degrees is our set point, and we have to hold it for 30 minutes. So that's where those charts are very, very helpful. And again, there's ways that you can reduce your cook time, and we're not going to even touch on this much tonight, by using different inhibitors. And by inhibitors, those are things as simple as salt, regular table salt,
acidity, vinegars,
acid, exactly, and sodium nitrite, which anyone who does bacons, those are something where bacons and hams, you would add nitrite to reduce the botulism.
But I mean, with that being said, there's a lot of simple steps that we can start with that you can do at home to ensure that you are safely cooking sous vide. One of them is make sure your meat's not rotten before you cook it. It sounds, very self-explanatory, but make sure you have the freshest product possible. Make sure that product that you're going to cook has been stored at a proper temperature. By proper temperature, we want to be 41 degrees or below for the duration that you've had it, hopefully since it's been cut off the animal. Before you put it in a vacuum bag, we recommend going down to 38 degrees Fahrenheit before you actually vacuum seal it, okay? You want to do...
I think well, we've got a video about some of this, but starting with clean environments, another thing to think about for safety. So I know somebody asked about the reusable bags. One of the things that we're concerned about is, anything that we put in that bag is going to be cooked in an anaerobic environment. So we want to make sure that it's sterile going into it. And then as Adam mentioned, we're going to cook and we're going to hold it at a specific temperature. And then from there, it's important to get to a safe chilled temperature.
So if you're not going to eat it right away, so a lot of people will pull it right out of the sous vide, dry it off, let it rest, and sear it off. You're good to go. But if you're not going to eat it for an initial day or another week or so, cooling is of utmost importance. It's actually probably the most important step. Is what we call cooling and storage. So what you want to do, being in an anaerobic environment, you've held off that bacteria from replicating for so long during the cooking process. It's not dead, it just hasn't grown. So if you improperly store it in a vacuum bag, it can grow rapidly again.
And so that's where there's some techniques for doing that. And all these depend on how big of a cut of meat. So think about trying to freeze a 55-gallon drum of water. It's going to take a lot longer to freeze than an ice cube tray. So the same thing goes here. If we have a thin cut, like the Copa steak, we can chill it below 40 degrees in under 4 hours very easily. If we had something like a whole butt roast or a whole hog, for example, you'd have to chill it much more rapidly. In this instance, we're suggesting to just drop it into the vacuum bag, fully sealed, out of the circulator into a chilled water bath.
Now, what we recommend as well is just like resting a steak, when you have a steak or whatever cut of meat you have come out of the oven, we don't cut into it right away, right? Because all the juices will expel themselves all of your countertop. In sous vide, it's just the same way. Some of the juices have expelled themselves into the bag. So what I do is I'll take that bag out, put it on the countertop for about 30 minutes, and those juices will suck back into the meat as it cools. If you were to take the vacuum bag straight out of the circulator and drop it into the ice bath, those cellular walls will close in the meat, essentially locking out all that liquid then forever. So let your meat rest for about 30, 40 minutes, then vacuum seal it, or excuse me, ice bath it. If you're truly worried about not cooling your meat down in time, there's a very simple solution. Simply lay it on a sheet tray, put it in your refrigerator, and cut the bag open. Then you allow oxygen in, the anaerobic
Microbes.
pathogens such as botulism won't grow as fast.
Any other questions? So I think we've had some, thank you everyone for the very nice compliments. We have a lot of those up on the board. There's questions about what we'll email out afterwards. We will send out the link to the full video for tonight. We'll try to draft up some recipes as well for the side dishes. Our recipes, as we mentioned when we were cooking earlier, are more technique and less specific to the weight and time of each ingredient that you're going to cook. So be prepared when those come out that they're going to be
more technique driven than exact recipes. And that's, you know, as you follow our classes moving forward, I think our next class coming in February is going to be a braising class. As we move forward, this is really what we want to show you guys. I don't want you guys to rely on a recipe. I want you guys to learn technique
and confidence in the kitchen.
Yeah, because that's what really counts. It's not exact grams, or trust me, we work in a butcher shop where we have people come in and say, I need 1 3/4 pounds of ground chicken. It's like, do you really? You know, or 1 3/4 pounds of pork shoulder or something. I'm like, you're going to take all that time to cook a pork shoulder.
Yeah,
have a little extra. Yeah. So not relying directly on recipes and relying on your technique and confidence is where we really want you guys to be at. So,
as Adam mentioned, in terms of other classes, we do have some things coming up here in the near future. In February, we have one completely opposite sous vide. It's traditional braising, and this will start with talking about what cuts again, how to produce proper stock, what equipment, how to braise, the difference between a cure and a marinade, how to glaze it at the end. A lot of things we'll be able to touch on these techniques. And that's on February 13th. So it's just in time for Valentine's Day. And that's it's a couple's dinner as well.
And talk about a great way to be able to take a cheap, less expensive cut of meat and turn it into a fantastic dinner. So many people, trust me, so many people come in and they want ribeyes, filet mignons for Valentine's Day. I think a comforting homemade stew or a braised shank is lights out.
Especially a shareable meal. And that's what we're promoting that night. And actually the evening before, we'll also send out an invite for this one. It's a fundraiser we're participating in for a neighbor, actually the direct neighbors of the farm, the Wilderness Center. And they're doing a program about it's called The Birds and the Bees. It's about animal courtship, and it'll include a presentation from a naturalist about some of the quirky things that animals do in their mating. And then we'll tie this into food by preparing a dinner. It's a lavender honey glazed duck breast with a speltberry risotto with duck confit and
some like another. We're going to do another. We'll do a little bit of carrot puree and some sous vide carrots as well.
Yeah, so. And that'll be a fundraiser for a nonprofit group, and we'll send out an invite for that. That's on Friday, February 12th, and on Saturday, February 13th is our braising class. But those are just 2 ideas we have. We know that everyone watching probably has a ton of questions in the kitchen, or hopefully have things that you can suggest to us for future classes. If so, please post them in the chat on this event or reply back to the email you got earlier today. We're always looking for new ideas. I know in the past, we've done everything from Chicken 101 to vegetarian cooking and things like that. And we're trying to kind of revisit our agenda and what we can teach.
Yeah. And until we can get back together in person, let's figure out how to be together via Zoom. So please email over. You can email over to info@Ohio City Provisions. Was it info@Freshwork Market, I think.
Yeah.
So you guys have that. Just shoot us over ideas, anything you want to see, anything you need help with. And maybe we'll start figuring out some more classes. Because right now, past February, the schedule is clear for us as far as classes go. Just had another question come in. Why sparkling over cab? Cab would work 100% with this. I can see that working. What we went for sparkling is to kind of help cut through the fat. So it's the pork shoulder obviously has a lot of intramuscular fat, as we discussed earlier. The the Brut Rosé from M. Cellars is nice and bone dry. It helps cut through the fattiness. One of the sauce you just completely reduce down to almost like a gelatinous finish. The fattiness in the pork shoulder and the hardiness of that celery root puree. The only other acidic thing on the plate to help balance it was the beets and the cabbage. So we thought something nice like a sparkling wine would help cut through and balance the rest of the dish.
Any other questions in there?
We'll give you guys just a couple more minutes for questions, comments, concerns.
This celeriac was fabulous. Any way to make it without dairy?
So we had a question, celery rack puree was fabulous. Any way to make it without dairy? Absolutely. You would just cover it. You can simply cover it in stock. I've done 100% vegetable purees before. We've actually just covered it in water and simmered it and used the water to puree it. There's also different types of nut milks and almost yogurts and creams that you can start to buy, and you can incorporate those into your purees as well. Some of those can be a little more sensitive to heat, so just make sure you're not separating them.
Any other questions here? Well, we thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We hope you enjoyed the meal. Again, this is a lot of fun, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in February.
All right. Cheers, guys. Have a blessed night.